Welcome all. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking your time today and joining us this afternoon, the live webinar. My name is Harish Cholleti and I lead Sparity as Director of Partnership. And along with me, we have Jeff Surratt, Director of Cybersecurity Practice at Sparity. Sparity is a global technology consulting firm established in the year 2010 and headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We have about 200 plus engineers and currently serving 80 plus clients that range from startups to large enterprises, assisting them in the areas of cybersecurity, digital transformation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Today, Jeff is presenting threat actors and industry targets. Jeff has worked in information security for 20 years in various public and private sector information technology positions. Before becoming a director at Sparity, he worked in the architecture team at CenturyLink, advising clients on corporate and multinational government career at the multinational cybersecurity solutions, paying attention to the GRC requirements of the related industry. During his government career at the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, he had roles in counterintelligence, force protection, supply chain risk, and as liaison to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Throughout his 20-year career, he has concentrated on threats from Russia and the Asia Pacific region, covering counterintelligence and cyber activities of nation states and the business that supports them. Jeff began his career as an information security specialist at the Federal Reserve, focused on policy development and organizational structure to support a national compliance program. Before we get started with the presentation, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into Q&A box below in your Zoom control panel, and we will address them at the end during the question and answer session. Now, without further delay, we will get started. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Harish, I have a difficulty with my webcam.
Let's go ahead without the video, Jeff.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, we are not able to show Jeff's face for now, but we'll keep showing in the next coming webinars. No issue.
Okay. Again, thank you for everybody. And today we are going to talk about threat actors and industry targets. Most of what I'm going to present is based on my experience over the last 10 years. So we're not going to go back very far. A lot of the information and my focus comes from my time with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service while I was overseas. And I just returned to the States a year and a half ago. So let's see if we can carry forward, and I've got some updated information for you. So we're going to start with understanding the who and the why. Many times when businesses talk about, the recent breach, it's always about the what happened, when it happened, and did we lose any data, and do we have to do any reporting? We don't often go into the methods and who did it and why. And that's what I'd like to cover a little bit today. So the threat actors and industry targets that we deal with over the last 2 or 3 years have focused on supply chain, utilities, education, banking, finance, and government. The utilities industry has been hit most recently and actually has increased the most over the last couple of years. Just during this year, from April to August, the number of incidents jumped to at least 17. Some of them are probably unreported. And this time of year, education is a target. Many of the clients that serve the universities, many of the students, and many of the instructors, teachers themselves usually get hit with phishing emails related to school topics such as approved vacation, updated class schedules, things of that manner. And they don't often pay attention to who's sending it. So they're actually a very big target right now, as well as banking and finance. However, this is different from different regions of the world. Right now, Japan is being hit as of last week. And the hackers are actually coding their malware to only be region specific. So meaning it will only work inside Japan. And then since 2007, of course, the government has been a target and will probably continue to be a target. But over the last several years, especially this year and the year previous, so 2017, 2018, the number of government targets has been reduced to about 3%. The other targets are businesses, and it's really cyber crime, meaning something with monetary value, and that's about 90% now. The other percent is usually what we used to call script kiddies, or people who are just generally inquisitive and trying to do things they shouldn't. The sources of cyber threats, as you can see here, are financial services, largely tech and entertainment, and then again, government and military is a target, but only from China, North Korea, and Russia. It didn't include Iran because they just recently became active. But what you should notice is cybercrime has gone up. It was previously a medium threat, and now it is a high threat. And that's why I've illustrated it the way it is. High is growing and will probably only get worse. So let's take an example of some threat actors that have just recently become resurgent. So Cozy Bear has several different names. They are most commonly referred to as Advanced Persistent Threat 28. And several of the related sponsors are the general staff of the Russian government and the Federal Security Service themselves. And they tend to focus, again, on government activity, but they also focus on what we call clear defense contractors. And again, they're trying to gain monetary and developmental information that they can use themselves. Strontium has been operating since 2004, but they went dormant for a very long time and just recently came back into being with a focus on Europe and Central Asian countries. Again, largely with a focus on government, but they've recently branched into monetary gain as well. Sandworm, again with various names, Voodoo Bear, Telebots, they're the ones that hit the Ukraine electric utilities in 2015 and again in 2016. And they've also tested the waters with Australia and us. Palmetto Fusion, again, US energy grids, and they actually helped Sandworm with the attack in 2015. And they also did some tests with Ireland and Turkey. So again, I only point these groups out because they were quiet for a while and then they suddenly become active again. Likewise in China, although this one I want to specifically call out because many people ask, why did we give up supporting Huawei and why don't we want Huawei phones? So the Ministry of State Security is associated with a company called Boysec. And Boysec is associated with the Information Technology Evaluation Center in China itself. The director is associated with Huawei, and they are obviously the largest cell phone maker in Asia. So following the threat, so it goes from public China to the Ministry of State Security to the development area, which is the China Information Technology Sector, then down to Guangdong Information Technology Evaluation Center, all the way down to Boysec, which is actually Advanced Persistent Threat 3 Gothic Panda. China, again, becoming resurgent. TIC is a group that's been around for a while, but they've also been quiet. They started a little later in 2008, but they are focused pretty much on Asia and not the United States. But they are also targeting government and defense, especially in Japan, and anybody who has military ties with us as far as supplying military gear to them, because it's become easier for them to gain information from them than it is for us. because of several efforts by the local government here and the national government as well. Again, I mentioned Wicked Panda, Winty, because they have become Resurgence also, except they are now focusing on holidays. Many of the information, the emails, the phishing schemes will focus on taking normal domains and renaming them. So for instance, here we have Gmail, and they've shortened it to Google. And many people aren't going to pay attention because they use the logos, etc., in the email, and they have the click here to update or click here to retrieve your email, things of that nature. But they usually focus on the software organizations in the United States, as well as those in Japan and China. Japan, mainly TV manufacturers. And since the China-sponsored, government-sponsored entity, it's interesting to note that they've also began focusing on China business itself. Then we have another resurgent actor. They were previously called Silent Librarian, and they're associated with Iran. They have always focused on students and education systems. And I'm not going to go over every fact, but the most important thing is that the number of foreign universities has increased and is now spanning 21 countries. And 36 private companies that are usually associated with universities, such as books, education, companies that sponsor sports, etc., are the targets. And again, resurgent this year, mainly due to the holidays and this time of year. So how do they pick their targets? So many are familiar with the term data aggregation, but this is to illustrate how different data is combined with other data in order for them to create a target. So they will focus on our relationships and business relationships. So we have high-level executives that may have transferred from one company to another, and they were previously attacked in one company, but now LinkedIn might say they're working for another company, but people are creatures of habit. So one password is used in multiple locations. They may have a take-home device again, things of that nature. Military officers, since I was in CIS in Japan, this is one of my biggest headaches because they would always respond to phishing scams pretty much with regularity, especially if they were traveling anywhere in Asia, because the actors would pose as relatives that they would pick from Facebook and email them. And of course, people are always excited to hear from the relatives while they're stationed overseas. So they would click the link and things would happen from that point on. Jumping over to finance, they're always after customer data comparisons. So if anybody remembers in 2014, the HR department for the government was basically hit. And so many of our credentials were lost. So from that point, they would begin to track where we are, what we do using Facebook, LinkedIn, other contacts that we have, and drawing comparative analysis between what we do, where we go, what banks we use, things of that nature. They also attack the supply chain. And by supply chain, we're talking about company A may purchase item from company B. Company A may have a relationship such as the company outsources HR, company outsources payments. They would attack the HR and payments because those are usually smaller corporations. And then IoT attacks. So again, I'm picking on China, but many of our IoT devices are developed in China and sent here, or sent to other locations ordered through websites. Many of the devices have backdoors built into them. In fact, one person that I used to work with, I'm not going to name names, but over in one of the companies that dealt with the government, bought a new camera for his house. Although he was smart enough to have logs kept because he was an IT person. And he realized during log analysis that his camera was phoning home. And so he quickly deactivated, realizing that it was sending pictures of him in his living room back to China. So the industries that they focus on, again, are banking, finance, healthcare, utilities, government, and education. Right now, banking and finance, healthcare, and education are the primary targets. So how do they do this? How do they pick a target? How do they collect information? So whomever decides to go after data usually starts their hunt with research. Once they have the research completed, they'll say, okay, well, this person most likely has the information I'm looking for. So they begin the target analysis program. The actors, whether it's cybercrime or government sponsored, always follow the same program. It's built in, well developed, and shared on the dark web. The information is shared. So they will look at corporate directories, they will look at news, they will look at Facebook, Instagram, things of that nature, and then they will formulate the attack. So how do we get this information? They will look at libraries that the government keeps or libraries on the dark web and either pay for the library or have somebody on the dark web develop it. So right now, what's going on is medical information, especially medical officers and agents. So insurance agents, things of that nature. I don't have it listed here, but for that to be developed for somebody to use is costing on average between $15 and $20 million. Once they have what they need as far as the attack, they will look at the information they collected. So they probably collected a linkage to you or the company. They've probably attacked other people in the company and gained corporate knowledge. And maybe they're after a system design or a part diagram. And again, I'm calling from that to declared defense contractors who have dual use technologies. Then they will say, okay, did we connect with the relevant information? Did we get it? Yes or no. If it's no, they'll go all the way down to the bottom again. If yes, then they'll add it to their data collection repository and move on. So what's the cost to US businesses? So the key thing here to note is that the cost year over year is going up. So in the past 2 years, the loss to us due to cybercrime has increased from 11.7 million to 13.0 million, which is a 12% increase, which increases the last 5 years 72%. So I'm not going to go over all these details, but if anybody has any questions, then we can address them at the end. So what does Sparity offer to help you with this? So our framework is based on the common framework, which is identify, protect, detect. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure why it keeps doing that. Detect, respond, and recover. Again, we can go over details later. But from our threat and vulnerability assessment, we have a methodology that goes over information gather. Here we go again. Sorry. I do apologize. I don't know why my computer's got a mind of its own. So information gathering, threat modeling, basically the same pattern that an attacker would go through is what we would go through as far as, and I'm not sure why we're scrolling. Apologize again. But once the data is collected, we go over analytics. So predictive, presented, response, and detection, and try to enhance your program so that you can adapt to the new and incoming threats. From a business enterprise, we can also engage with risk management principles, business functions, and risk-based decisions based on what has been found and discovered. So we will go through the complete stack, meaning processes, architecture, applications, and design, and help you develop the frameworks and policies, such as NIST 853, that will help define how you assess your environment. And if needed, we will also engage with upgrading the technologies using either a consultant or a direct hire to work directly with your company on-site or off-site. And so this, we were talking about picking targets. As I was working on the presentation and doing some research last night, this email popped in. So it passed my spam filter, so that means I need to make some adjustments. But what you'll notice in here is that Yahoo is not the correct logo. And the information in here is very dated, considering Yahoo is basically a defunct organization as far as email is concerned. They listed changes that they supposedly made. And of course, if you need to download something, click this link. So the reason why I left the email header up here is so we could pay attention that it's yahoo.net, which is not actually a Yahoo domain. But had I clicked this, then I would probably have malware on my corporate laptop. And it happens that quick. Now, I did not research who the sponsor for this was, but I'm going to guess that it's probably just a cyber criminal organization that's regional and not focused on me as a former NCIS person or otherwise. So at this point, we'll take questions. No questions? All right, then I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, for providing us interesting insights into the threat actors, geographies affecting industries, and important solutions. How do we cover through? And it was nice hearing to you what kind of services under Sparity we provide in terms of cybersecurity. So thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. If you don't have any questions, we would. Okay. I have one chat from James. Will Jeff share his presentation with viewers? Yeah, I'm going to answer your question in my concluding remarks. So just checking the final thing. Guys, you have any questions, please use the question and answer tab here. And if you don't have in next few couple of minutes, we will go ahead and then conclude the presentation. Okay.
So I see the question.
Yeah.
I see a question here from Lee. Do you think the biggest issue is national security or financial impact? So it depends on your perspective. So from a national security standpoint, again, they are focused on the clear defense contractors, which basically means people who are developing systems that may or may not be used by the government. So we have what's called dual use technologies. So for instance, back a couple of years ago, there was a type of engine that was going to be used for airplanes. And it could have been used by the government, or it could have been used by, Boeing. At one point, that particular system, actually a part of that system, had to be classified. So the development chain split. So it really depends on where you're focusing. So right now, as I said, financial impact is the larger target because it's easier to go after, and countries in Asia Pacific who are developing don't quite have their security programs set up. We are, selling technologies to them, so it's easier to go after them than it is to go after us. But the financial impact is growing. In fact, by 2025, it's expected to be about $1.2 trillion lost in Asia and approaching $3 trillion here in the United States. So the next question from Dave is, what are your recommendations for smaller companies? So smaller companies need to take a look at mostly the risk and compliance. So there are some risks that can be accepted and some risks that can't. So a smaller company is going to have a larger issue with data loss and data loss prevention. So most recovery for smaller companies is in the $20,000 range if you actually have an incident. Also, your reporting based on the government and your industry is going to be different. So for instance, if you lose less than 200 points of personal information, it depends on whether you have to report that or not. So the public impact might be less, but if it takes you a long time and an expense to recover and you're a small business, $20,000 might be a large issue for you. But the overall recommendation is to go over the compliance framework for your industry and make sure that you're following it. So a question from Kevin. What are your observations about the most common types of exploited vulnerabilities that are the root cause of most incidents? Is it in general technology or people that serve as the ingress point? So to address that part of the question first, it is still, and has been for several years, it is still phishing and social aspects to the employees. So like I provided the example for the phishing that was directed at me, it made it through my filter. So if I were not aware, if I were not a cyber person that made it through my built-in Google or my built-in iMac software, I would think, oh, that's okay, I'm going to click on it. But having worked in the industry for a long time, obviously I pulled it out and used it as an example. But this time of year especially, that's when things come through, because they're focused on your Amazon shipments, your financial records. I mean, I've even had people call and say, we're calling about your credit card we think has been breached, please call us back. And then you call them back and they'll ask for, personal information. So right now, especially this time of year, it's phishing scams and social engineering scams. Is generally
Jeff, we have
technology.
another question from you. Yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
The second part of his question is, in addition, for an organization with limited resources, where do you observe the best bang for the buck in information security improvements? So number one is the training, internal cybersecurity training. Again, there are several points of entry into your organization. I am not going to say that most of them are with, say, your admin staff, etc. Actually, it's going to be with your financial systems and your executive leadership, because they're going to be the ones that go home with their computer. They're going to be the ones that have the home office that they work from a lot. And they may or may not be compliant with your individual corporation's security posture, because usually, they're under a deadline, they need to do something, they may request an exception, and that's usually where you get hit. Right now, it is actually the chief financial officer and the chief operating officer of a company that are usually the targets. And again, the people will do research on LinkedIn or Facebook and try to tie those together and attack from that point of view. And then Kevin asks, if LinkedIn or other job search industry companies are a source for research, what is being done to help prevent wrongful research in these industries? Well, actually, the research is based on the information you provide. So the less information you provide, the better off you are. One example, personal example, and I'm not aware of the time, sorry, is when I worked for NCIS. So I would have to travel into Asia a lot. one of our requirements was we could post photographs of, wherever we were at, as long as we posted it a week after we got back. So following that, that is a practice that I've still adopted and do. As far as LinkedIn is concerned, list your companies, list your overall activities, but don't break down into detail. So I've seen a lot of LinkedIn, especially for the security realm, IT realm, where people actually post, I'm familiar with XYZ technology, I've worked in Apache, I've worked in this. Those are the things you don't want to post. Those are the things that you will hold back as far as saying, if you want my resume or my CV, depending on where you're at, then, ask me directly or send me a LinkedIn message and I'll send it that way. Don't go out there and have a direct link to your resume, because you're just making yourself a target. Are there any other questions or things I didn't answer fully?
Jeff, for now, it looks we have covered most of the questions, and I see someone raise the hand. Yeah. I see James raising the hand. Do you have any questions, James? You could, post us through question and answer so that we could answer your question. I think this is the same question which James has asked us. Will Jeff share the presentation with the viewers? Yes, the presentation and the webinar will be uploaded to our website. So our team will be sending out an email with the uploaded webinar link. You could go and you could go to the location and then access this webinar. Seems we don't have many other questions. Jeff, is there anything else you want to cover before I wrap up?
Well, actually, I'm just going to share one story so you can understand the full experience of what may happen. Granted, you're not working for the government, but I used to travel a lot to China and Russia. And given the Office of Personnel Management hack in 2015, I became what I would call with them a person of interest. So the first time that I traveled to Russia, again, I was not going as a government official. I was going on my own to continue my Russian education language. I landed in St. Petersburg late at night and was going through, going through check bags, etc., picking up, going to get my stamp on my passport and move on. And it ended up taking me 3 hours to get through, because the lady stood there and talked with another lady for that long and held me on the side of the line, because they knew who I was and who I was coming from based on information they had collected from the OPM hack. It only ended, because I spoke Russian, when I asked them, are we done yet? And literally they looked at me and said to each other, let him go. So I passed on through. Again, recently, traveling again on my own, not as a government official, went into Beijing. And it was actually only supposed to be a layover for me, but again, because of the OPM hack, because of other data that had been taken, because there were other websites that also had my name that listed me as a cleared person, I was detained for 24 hours. And that was again because of my role. I wasn't there in any official capacity, but I was put into a room and asked questions every hour on the hour for that 24 hours. When they didn't get anything or anything they wanted, they put me on a bus all by myself, sent me to the terminal, bought me a first class ticket, and sent me on my way. But those things aren't going to happen to you, but those are the things that can be gathered. So who you are, again, what you do, where you go, and who you're associated with, all make you a target, all make your company a target. So when you're doing your internal presentations, when you're doing your assessments internally, when you're doing your third-party risk, make sure all that is included. Make sure you understand, the risks that you're presenting to your company while you're traveling. Those types of things. That's all that I wanted to add to that. But again, thank you very much for your attendance.
Yeah. So since we have, learned a story, and then we have a learning associated to that story. It was interesting, and thank you, Jeff, for sharing the insights and underlying threat actors across geographies. I hope this webinar gave you the required information. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We'll get in touch with the feedback form, and today's webinar will be uploaded to our website, sparity.com, and can be viewed at any point of time. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Before we log off, remember, Sparity is a one-stop shop solution provider for cybersecurity needs, be it providing, resourcing at your end or at our end. Do remember to send us an email, sales@sparity.com. I repeat, sales@sparity.com. Thank you, and have a great evening ahead.